Hey folks, make myself look pretty. That didn't work. Oh well, I'm screwed. Uh, Ben Vidgen here from Ben's World, postmanproductions.org. I do a newspaper called Deadline. I do a magazine called Ben's New Zealand. And if you look at my shoulder, you'll see some of my books here, back a few of them anyway. States here because I've been 4 books. Today I'm going to try, basically going to do about a 20-minute video. I may add to that over the weekend. As I get to Friday, I'll get to more chance to do some more stuff. And basically, my idea is to keep the video there and then just put the links down below. I may not be able to do that tonight, so you might have to come back and check it tomorrow if you want the full links backing up what I'm saying. Alternatively, just go to my Facebook page, which is Ben Vidgen, and if you don't know how to spell Vidgen, it's very easy. You take the first three letters of the word video, V-I-D, you take the first three letters of the word general, G-E-N, and you get the video general or Vidgen. So if you go to the Facebook page, my settings are set on public, so you can just scroll down there. The one you actually want is it's a big illuminated on a black background. I'm talking about the fact that during the year there's 12 million lightning strikes, and in the last 72 hours, well, preceding the volcanic explosion in White Island, we have seen a total of 830,000 in New Zealand, which is basically the equivalent of a month's worth dumped in 2 days. That's the planet's worth dumped in 2 days. I've been basically over the year, over probably the last 2-3 years, I've been actually noticing those particular strikes, and I'll try and get back to that issue because if this is a non-naturally occurring event, which by the way I'm not saying it is, I'll just present the facts and then I'll leave you guys to decipher, how you think they fall. But if it's not, there's a science behind it which I'll try and get into, if not this video, later ones. And again, it's everything we're talking about here. There's source material behind it. It's not ooga booga booga stuff. It's actually got some very strong, scientific principles out there. And if you go and actually out and go and do your own reading and research of good sources, things like National Geographic, Washington Post. I always like to stick with mainstream ones because it doesn't necessarily mean that alternative media won't, but it just means you're not opening the door to like, oh, that's all flakery stuff. And occasionally even I turn around, we make mistakes, but hopefully today will blow you a wee bit away. So let's go back a wee bit in time. About December the 7th, I basically looked out my window. I'm living in New Zealand here. I look Karitani, small fishing village, and I look onto Mount Watkins, and behind it is the Manitoto Range, where recently we've just had, like a lot of New Zealand, like fires break out very close to where um, our water reserves are. But again, that's another story. Let's stick to this topic. And I looked out there the other night and I saw a massive flash of lightning, and it wasn't like, again, I've lived in this area 20 years, you get to know the patterns. This was more like saying it was moving across the sky so quick that it was like a flash, but it was like, well, what the fuck's that? And I've been aware of since even coming down here because my mum's just passed away recently. We're getting double rainbows and stuff, which is it's all symptomatic of ionization in the atmosphere, which basically means the sky is incredibly charged, and that's basically what we're looking at. And even been very astute people might have noticed it for the last couple of weeks. I've been saying, like, there's a tinnitus noise kind of going on all the time. It's interesting enough. Stopped today. I don't since this morning. It's gone. So that's anyway. That's was I was aware that there was a sort of intense energy. So I put out a post on the 7th of December for saying, well, it's this I've got a really funny feeling about what's going on here. And next morning, as I put that out, sort of thinking out, what was out towards Manitoto, which is as you head out towards that way, you've got Leo Labs, which is sort of in Central Taiga on private land, but it's another one of these. Again, see my video on my Facebook page, Ben's World. Postman Productions, you'll see the one about Rockte Lab there. There's a whole bunch of the space stuff that's been popping up in New Zealand quite regularly. And I went, oh yeah, okay, that's interesting. I was thinking about this, and one of my readers turned around and dropped me the bit about Rockte Lab, which again, there's lots of stuff on my page about Rockte Lab, which is it's a New Zealand investment company. It started up, but it's basically it's backers of the US Navy, and it's Lockheed Martin, and a lot of dubious money involved in that from characters in New Zealand, which are pretty well famous for their role in white collar crime and tax evasion and that kind of carry on. And this is right smack in the bang of an area which is very, very rich in minerals. And again, for those who've been paying attention to Rockte Lab, it does have a very strange habit of every time it launches some stuff, there are these weather anomalies that take place. The key one that we want to actually have a look at today is have a look at the fact that what I turn around and everyone's like looking at, what's going on the ground with a volcano and this sort of thing takes off a few days later. Well, I went, well, hey, if we're dealing with stuff that's, in the upper atmospheric stuff that's having an impact on the ground, let's have a look in space first of all. So on the links that you'll see on my Facebook page relating to that one about the 300,000 strikes, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff about basically the Americans are launching their own version of their Space Force and launches this weekend. Same time that we've turned around and sent this rocket up into space, which has got an interesting payload connected to the Japanese. And again, look at those links, because in those links, the Japanese are specifically talking, and the newspaper, which this China Post Times, again, fairly mainstream papers, are talking about the use of electromagnetic spectrum, and so we're talking upper atmosphere stuff. But it's the one that says about the rocket that the Chinese have launched, which is explaining about it's a specific type of new rocket which is designed to overcome missile defense systems because it's ultra fast. These are what you call your hypersonic missiles. This is exactly the same thing that Rocket Lab actually is. And if you actually look at the signature on the rocket, on that particular rocket, which caught a lot of people's attention, and that's what the article is about, explaining why it has that particular plume of smoke behind it, and then you cross-reference against the one that is in Rocket Lab. Again, you see an absolute snap. So again, it verifies what I'm saying to you about Rocket Lab, is that Rocket Lab is not a lovely little satellite. Oh, isn't it wonderful? We've got William Shatner coming to visit it. It's actually a weapons launch system. This thing launches things that have a defense application. Again, the timing is quite interesting. Last time we saw it launch was the 9th, which was the same weekend of the Christchurch shooting in 2015. What it was launching at that particular weekend is a system which, again, I'll put the links up later on, or you can go and check it out yourself, because all the stuff is actually on Rocket Lab's own website. But what it basically was doing was it was launching a system which enhances signal propagation. So what you find is that the more you try and send a signal up into space, the weaker it actually becomes. So basically, what this launched in March was a system which kind of boosted that thing. So any ground-based weapons that were EMF or electrical medical based, it basically it gives it a little bit of it's a bit of Viagra, for want of a better word. At the same time, we're looking at the conditionings of this time, because again, previously there's a lot of research and stuff. This stuff has actually happened in New Zealand since the 60s, and people like Owen Wilkes, that used to be very much mainstream news source, people in New Zealand that are in their 50s that have a memory will actually remember that Owen Wilkes is a very respected character, and he exposed a lot of this stuff that was happening back in the 1670s 70s with Americans. It's now happening again, and he talked a lot about the signal propagation. So, what they've learned is there's a lot of things about prime conditioning. So, in my various reports over the years, I've noted the fact that when you've got good solar space weather activity taking place, and when you've got moon conditions, these are all things that actually, they give it that ability to boost the signal. So again, what we're seeing going into the 12th of the 12th, or maybe potentially the 12th, 13th, but is what you're going to have is full moon, which is really good for that whole kind of. We saw the situation, for example, in the last Kaikoura earthquake, where people turn around and said, well, there's a full moon, it's going to enhance the tidal effect, and the GNS turned around and said, no, it's not. And then basically a whole bunch of world experts came around and turned around and said, well, actually, you guys, you might be earth scientists, but bugger all about the atmosphere. And it had basically GNS come back and say, well, yeah, from now on we'll stick to our knitting, which is, this is the problem a lot of time what's been happening, is that journalists will run off and they'll investigate land-based scientists, but they never talk to astrophysicists or people who study the atmosphere. So they end up with being told only half the story, because they haven't checked the various disciplines. You quite often can have different findings. And on that note, you'll actually notice that one of the things that's actually taking place at Rocket Lab at the moment too is that they are working with, I said Victoria University the other day, that wasn't correct, it was actually Auckland University, but they've got their own space program again, and they're working on a thing called quakes. So again, all these things which I've been speaking about for the last 4 or 5 years, in fact probably going back to the 2004 Indonesian tsunami, when we started watching the magnetic anomalies taking place in the upper atmosphere. It's now what these scientists are actually looking for, the same thing. I'm saying, well, actually, when the upper atmosphere, which is specifically is what they call the D region of the ionosphere, when that becomes stimulated, which is either naturally or man-made or occurred, that creates a natural, field. There's a natural field of plasma taking place already. So when you ground stuff on the ground, or like say in HARP or one of the big, microwave dishes around the world, and you aim it at that particular field, and you're looking for areas where this activity is taking place, naturally in the atmosphere, which you can either track via things like the Hubble Space Telescope, or previously the shuttles that they naturally used to launch. So they'll find an area that's activity. So you've got your ground-based station, it targets that particular area, and then that area is then redirected basically to the ground-based station. And basically, if it acts just like a microwave. So you've got that signal kind of going into an area where there's a natural plasma field going on that will actually stimulate the magnet of the area, and you can actually end up with seismic activity. That's one area. And again, what I'm trying to say is that once upon a time, our Earth-based scientists will say, no, that's not the case, that's not the case. But now if you actually look at things like Quake Tech, which are at Rockte, it's showing you that the atmosphere scientists are saying, well, actually, no, this is actually quite logical. Actually, what happens in the atmosphere does actually have a link with what happens on the ground. So this is why, again, this lightning strike, which I basically, paid attention for the last couple of days. I turned around and said, what the fuck? And I normally, I don't know why, I would normally go and check the volcanoes. I wasn't actually aware until this morning that this event occurred, but I was already on my radar. And I said, you'll see one of the links. There's a really good article there from National Geographic, and we're going to put up another one there as well, which even kind of carries that through, which are mainstream sources showing you how, when you see massive, abnormal lightning strikes happening in the atmosphere, it's actually it's an indicator that you may have activity, earthquake activity based, or you may have volcanic activity. So again, I'm not putting on my little tinfoil hat and making this up. There's some very mainstream, sensible, on the earth ground scientists who say this actually is a naturally occurring link. The only difference, I guess, where I go from these guys is I say, well, yeah, this is what our good old friends from the Uncle Sam and the boys in the military green are trying to do naturally. Again, our scientists academics go, no, they're not doing that. Well, again, let's roll back and let's compare that thing about the Earth-based scientists versus the atmosphere. Well, the reality is these naturally occurring plasmic fields, which give names like sprites and blue jets and so on, civilian scientists didn't even know they existed until 1995. And at that point, what actually happened was they were allowed to go up into military aircraft that were high altitude and they had high speed resolution cameras. And that was the first time that civilians had actually been studying it. But the military had been studying it for 40 to 50 years. And again, down here at Otago University with a guy called Stan, I think it's Dr. Stan Rogers, and he's written various papers out there, which, interesting character. But the point is, in his original papers, they were saying they had these, multi-spectrum lenses that they're using to look around for this sort of activity for when I was studying blue jets and sprites, and they would look at the American signal facilities in places like way up in Western Australian area, there's a couple of big major electronic warfare stations up there, and they'd look at these things and notice that there was activity on the ground kind of going poke, poke, poke. So again, we've got this very documented case of going, well, actually, no, they have been poking this thing here for quite a bit. So that's the kind of the background in terms of, yes, there is a link between lightning and volcanic activities. Anybody who tells you otherwise doesn't know their science. Yes, there actually is this link between the military have been trying to poke it for a long, long time, and we can find that kind of research specifically taking place at Rocket Lab, which is the Mahia Peninsula in that same east coast area, which goes up that area, which is, by the way, a very minerally rich occurring area. And again, when you look at things like HARP, for example, in the past, the voice turned around and said, oh, it can't cause earthquakes. Well, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole today, but we can say is that the U.S. Navy, which is one of the finances of it, have acknowledged years and years ago that actually that was one of the things HARP was designed to do, was to look for mineral and oil deposits in bunkers. So again, it's not conspiracy theory. It's actually replicating their own data to say this is one of its things that it can actually do. So there's a lot of, when you turn around and look at why did they actually base that station specifically in that area, well, it makes sense to anybody that knows the mineral enrichment of that area. It's a very mineral rich area. I would also turn around and say, the other people turn around and say, well, it's not happening. So, well, I've been reporting on this regularly since about 2015, and the general track record is I'll turn around, I'll come out and say, look, a week beforehand, look, this activity is going on here, we're seeing these things occurring. this is the area where I expect some kind of activity to occur. Boom, it takes place. And it's not that I'm the smartest guy or I've got a little crystal ball, but basically my background's ex-artillery intelligence, and whether you fire a pea shooter or you fire a nuclear bomb, all weapons work on the same principle, and that you know what you're looking at the end of the day is if the same person will appear, if you've got the same hardware in the same area, if you've got the same signatures, then it's normally an indication that you've got a sniper in the bush. And that's all I'm doing, is I'm looking from that element of, well, hey, we're seeing the same people, we're seeing the same hardware, we're seeing the same symptoms carry every time that particular thing that goes weapons hot. So that's the angle where I'm coming from. Then we get into the whole geopolitics, the geopolitical timing of it. Like in terms of this week to this today, and I've been busily firing feeds left, right, and centre. And I, as I drop them on the links over the weekend, I might expand on those, or maybe do some additional videos. Today's purpose is just to give you the quick rundown. But we have said today was that this weekend marks the beginning, official launch of the United States' military command. You have Japan and the United States are conducting a cyber space drill, which is also going to be looking at electromagnetic weaponry. When you look at the payload that was actually on Rocket Lab, this is part of this thing which they're putting forward to the Olympics, where they're going to be sort of firing off of fireworks over the Japan, and that's that's I'm sure what it is going to do. But when you actually look at the content of it, it's little balls of plasma. So again, we're talking about the whole plasma, and plasma attracts plasma. So my reading of it is actually what you're looking at is a device which kind of works a wee bit like chaff on an airplane. So when you fire a missile, say for example in an airplane, it fires off this chaff out the back. That creates a heat source which is designed to basically distract. And I think basically, outside of the events and partying, that's basically what you're looking at, what they launched this weekend. And so again, when you look at all the payloads and you start looking at the Rocket Lab websites and you start to go into those pages and you start to go down that rabbit hole, there's a lot of really rich material that shows you that this is very much defence platform. And what it's basically making New Zealand is a landlocked, basically aircraft carrier, which in turn makes us it makes us a target. So we will get into lots of other things. So let's put down, I'll probably turn around and do this stuff, and I'll come back and I'll do another video to recapture what I actually haven't done. But that's basically the geopolitics is, and again, this is the thing I said about the Olympics on the Rocket Lab post link that I put there on that stream down there. And again, I'll put those all up on the website below this YouTube clip, is that what you're seeing is that those Olympics, while they're going to be marketed as the peace and cultural diversity market, the reality is it's a real push and shove up there between China and Russia and America up in space at the moment. And everyone's actually launching their little weapons and trying to get it's all about air superiority. Any battle you fight, you always want to have the best air superiority. So if you can actually maintain a better orbital weapon or platform than another guy, then you basically come up with a new modern air support type. Also, the thing is, we're seeing as a strategic change now, where while Trump wants to pull out of the Middle East, he's trying to basically engage the Chinese and Russian within the Pacific. We're looking at 2020, you're going to have around 6% of the US fleet will be based in the Pacific. So this is the new DiMaggio line. And again, when you look at the defence white papers from probably about 10 years ago, I think it was the Australian one, John Pilcher made a documentary called The Coming War of China. That's actually from an Australian defence paper, and that should be a line, if you read the next line loud, says The Coming War with China, in which New Zealand will be on the front lines of that demarcation area. So, this is why this stuff's happening. For people who look at New Zealand and go, oh, it's a little, isn't it? That's Hobbiton. What could they possibly want there? New Zealand is the link to Antarctica. There's 3 other countries. You've got Australia, South Africa, the tip of South America that can get into Antarctica, but New Zealand's the only country that can give you the longest extended window, and that's the area which is very rich in minerals, and the real race is going on there. And I've seen in the previous video, what you're seeing right now is New Zealand base, which is on the Ross Shelf, which they claim is now shrinking, and the Americans are now extending their territory onto our New Zealand by claim, and there is a real race on there for the minerals down there. So we're access point to that. We're an access point to Australia, which in turn is the land bridge to Indonesia. We're an access point to South America. And basically with access point to the heart of places like Hawaii and Fiji, which if you want to protect your west coast of the United States, are very pivotal, parts of the whole Fortress America process. So, we're very much an important little country. I think sometimes when we look at the map, we forget that the world actually isn't square and two-dimensional. We actually live in a world which is actually multi-dimensional in the sense of you've got a round aspect of it, and then of course you've also got the point of things like going up in space, where Antarctica is also about controlling your satellite orbits spheres. So again, control New Zealand, you control the orbital satellite, which again about maintaining air superiority. New Zealand is also sits on what they call the submarine highway, which goes from Kirimak Trench, Cook Strait, virtually up to Hawaii. So again, if you want to maintain submarine dominance or under the ocean supremacy, we're actually very much important that whole controlling the Pacific part of the great risk board of this game that's going on. So that's the geopolitics of what's going on. We're also seeing today in the background of New Zealand things like the release of the electoral reform inquiry, which was there was concern that different governments were using it to control New Zealand's electoral process. That will be something that will be dropped beneath the ocean. There is Tessa Tamata, who's the High Commissioner to the Cook Islands, just died and has been sent home. I've written extensively about Tessa Tamata and point out that her background was in basically security and 5G and United Nations Agenda 2030, and saying a lot of this was also about control of the Pacific for the deep sea mining, all the stuff that you need for telecommunications and 5G and all that high tech, military metals. So her death in that area is quite significant. This full backdrops against, of course, the Samoa outbreak. Again, without getting, I'm by the way personally a pro-vaccinator. I know for some of you might go, but I do believe it saved a lot of lives. But I also don't like it when medicines are applied badly. The issue of the refrigeration that they've pumped a lot of the stuff into Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, but mostly Samoa was the one where they didn't actually have the refrigeration was insufficient. That's where we're seeing the massive deaths, and because they're using multiple shots, if you're using a virus that has broken down because of poor refrigeration, you're going to get cross-contamination. And my main point is looking at those statistics, like the New Zealand figures, which I've quoted in the past, is 1 in 1,000 cases of measles will get the deaths. You can increase that for a tropical country, etc., etc. But what we're seeing is fertility rates of 1 in 70 for the people that are infected, and that's going to rise surely. There is also this whole issue of the vaccination program where you've got 90% of the people vaccinated and yet the disease is still climbing, which indicates that you're getting cross-contamination there, because the fact that if it wasn't, it should be crashing, but it's not. It's continued to spike. So I'd watch that, and it's just like the lightning situation. You go, yes, no, but that's the mathematics, and that just does not lie. That, of course, has got huge repercussions as well. And it's interesting to see that story actually for the last 4 days has dropped off the line in a lot of the media feeds, because I think it was getting to a point where it's like, even the mainstream media were going, wait a minute, this is getting to be just, and so at the moment it's gone quiet. And I imagine, of course, what will happen a lot with the current situation with White Island is that Jacinda Ardern will make use of this opportunity to make a lot of selfies and make herself look good and improve, because right now she's crashing in the polls. She's on a 2-term plan. She wants to do 2 terms so that she can then get herself into the United Nations. Her mentor Helen Clark was basically paved the way for her. So she wants to achieve that first female Secretary General, which is not just about that. It's a part of the whole marketing process, which we're all aware of, those who know the situation. She can't afford to lose this election, so I'm not that surprised. This is also the same week that the New Zealand police are now rolling out this armed police response thing, $1.23 million for 4 vehicles. Again, I'm in the process of turning around and giving a big breakdown about why the police armed response is, again, it doesn't make sense when you understand basically the policing book on how to deal with armed offenders. Like I might take my model from the New York Police Department's hostage negotiation, which is the most successful terrorist unit. It's the one that everyone else has replicated. These guys are basically following a model which is supposed, and they're doing it on the basis of we've got to get cracked down on meth, but that's a model which worldwide has been dumped. So they're actually going, basically following the how to fuck things up model, which is, not my opinion. It's again, you read depthly, you read into basically what the worldwide different manuals and annual reports say. The rest of the world's going this direction and New Zealand's going that direction. So it's all part of this whole situation. There are lots of things which are happening worldwide, which I put lots and lots of links there. And the other thing too, which I just very briefly mentioned because it's not a major point, but it's one of the things which I've noted from day one. When originally Rockte was started, it didn't actually start in the Mahia Peninsula. It actually started at Mercury Island, which is a privately owned island by Fay Richwhite and Michael Fay and David Richwhite. I always get the two mixed up. Next to it is a little island called Red Mercury Island. That was actually named by Captain Cook, who was one of the people who discovered New Zealand. Red Mercury is kind of like turning lead into gold in alchemy. It's something that's been sought after for a very, very long time. When you go and read stuff online right now, you're not going to find any decent material about it. It's to the point where it's almost like people go, "Oh no, Red Mercury doesn't exist." It's all, from a person that studied terrorism and went for the academia stuff. No, Red Mercury actually is something that people have been concerned about for a long time. It exists. It's exceptionally hard to make. It's a very, very valuable material, and I'd be very interested to know what the how you actually make that product in terms of it's not one thing, it's many things put together, and I'd be very interested to see what you need to do, to the conditions you need to stimulate that. Basically what I read online was that you effectively have to fire a high particle accelerator or lots of energy, like say for example 872,000 lightning bolts into that at once. But that is just a side point, but I mention it. More to the relevance of poignant is that, of course, the other thing that we're seeing here is we're seeing a repeat pattern of 5 days beforehand. We're seeing the creation of the National Emergency Management Agency in New Zealand. I'll put some down links on that about who's running that particular agency. I've been commenting and saying, well, look, you can see where this is going, because basically that coordinates into things like exercise Tangaroa, which again was just like when the Kaikoura earthquake occurred. We just happen to have an exercise, and it occurs just like the Christchurch earthquake. Oh, we just happen to have an exercise. So we're seeing again this repeat pattern of the personnel always move in, personnel that come from a set background. They're always congregate around set hardware. So again, this is about, don't put your opinions and park them on the bench. Have a look at the fact that we're seeing the same little green trucks driven by the same little Bob the Builder people turning up. And when that happens again and again and again, it goes beyond coincidence. And as I said, when you turn around and say, well, if that's the case, is the science possible? I believe it actually is, from all of the links that I've actually put down there, the way they explain it. One of the things which also I will mention very quickly too is that, pardon me, I'm still hunting around for the scientific paper. I know I've actually read it, but what I'm also seeing is there's another method that HAARP can actually work, which is basically what they call an arc bridge. And how that works is you get a powerful stimulation of the ground-based stations in the northern hemisphere, and they just ramp up that ionosphere and those plasma clouds, red sprites, blue jets in the upper atmosphere. So you'll see, should be cross-referencing, there should be abnormal weather conditions took place in the northern hemisphere as well, probably the opposite, but that's going a little bit further out there. But the point is, they ramp that up, and then it gets discharged into the ocean, and those will emerge as forms of bolides or lightning strikes, which again, what I'm saying, I've written about this before, I've talked about it beforehand. Having said this is how it works, after the fact of what I've actually talked about, we're now seeing these, hugely mathematical anomalies. As I said again, 872,000 strikes in less than 2 days. The world average for that is 12 million. So if you break it down, give or take, it's about 32,000. So we've just seen basically the entire month for the planet dumped in little old New Zealand's pocket corners. So if you run the math on that, that's just like, whoa, up there. And that's it. I mean, there is no debating that. It's just like, I'm sorry, you find me another example where this has occurred. It's not. It has, sorry, I take that back. It has occurred, this sort of anomaly, but what you've seen is it's gone over a 3-4 year pattern. It started off with 5,000 lightning strikes in the time there were about 2 or 3 tornadoes broke up in Auckland about 2-3 years ago. Then it went up to 66,000 earlier in this year. Now we're seeing it at this high level. So we're seeing as the platform of things like Rocket Lab and various other infrastructure have gone in, the process has, and I said, this is what it was before they put the propagation antenna, which was launched during March 2019. We're now seeing with that system in place, which actually, that works in conjunction with things like 5G, it's just got whoom. So, again, we noticed during the Kaikoura earthquake, when this shit was going on, was we had, people like MV Tangaroa, which is part of the HAARP project, right off the coastline. You also had the Lockheed Martin running a weapons expo in Wellington at that time. So you had all these, I guess, guys looking at the big screen going, oh, boys, we'll like to show a new weapons test. And that's basically what we've seen a live weapons test Um, as far as the people that are hurt on the island, my heart goes out to them because that's just really horrific. We have to ask why is they were even allowed on the island, because again the warnings were occurring beforehand. We're also going to realise that you've got to look at White Island. That before White Island, early in this month, Tongariro went active, and again if you look a little bit further, you see there's been a lot of activity. So that you should have been, a really clear and present. Do not go there. The ship that actually turned up, the Caribbean, is actually owned by a company that's involved in petrogas exploration. Again, I've got the links for all of that. And I've only done a preliminary check around on the people that actually were in the families that were killed. The very first guy, I think, was Matthew Ure, something like that. He works for DuPont. He's a scientist. He's an engineer. He works for DuPont Natural Glass and Gases Limited. So again, it's a hell of a fucking coincidence that one of the first people to get noted happens to be of this fits the personnel. So again, it's this whole thing of if you got the right personnel, if you got the right hardware, if you got a established money trail, you can turn around and basically say, well, we're seeing the same thing happen again. This is more than a coincidence. This is, I'm saying, people up in New Zealand are going to go, oh, no, that's terrible. Sit back, go back and look at what I've been saying about things like Rocket Lab. Originally when I turned around and said, hey, this thing is a weapons platform, everybody said, no, it's not, it's all about climate change. Then it emerged that actually the finances were Lockheed Martin. Then we started to get bigger of a profile. So, what I'm basically saying is I have a track record on reporting on the stuff where I do my research very thoroughly. I report, I get knocked down by the mainstream media, and then basically 6 months later they actually turn around to catch up with me. So that's my context, and you can go through my Facebook pages, and you can go through my website, and spelling typo, yeah, I suck. I'm sorry, welcome to Bingle English, but my research is on that. I think that will do for enough for you to think about. Lots and lots of links for you on the web page, which I'll post this actually up as soon as I can on the website, Ben's World Postman Production. We'll just call it the news with Ben, and yeah, and one other thing, I said the full moon. Okay, cool. So just keep it safe, this people, this weekend. Don't get ridiculous. But it wouldn't hurt to have a little bit of extra water if you live up in the North Island. It wouldn't have any extra hurt to have things like baked beans and a bit of 3-4 days worth of food, medical facility topped up, fuel in your car, just basic safety precautions that we should do anyway. And otherwise, have a good weekend, and I will report as I find out more information. Ben's World, signing off.